Welcome to Story Hour, a virtual meetup hosted by Wolf and Heron.
When I thought of identity in terms of this context, my mind immediately went to my sexual identity. And I think it's because I'm fascinated by the complexity of sexuality and how much easier it is in today's world to be exploratory and to be open. And that's not to say that there isn't progress still to be made, of course, but I do feel like in my lifetime that I do feel like there is this general like openness in my lifetime that didn't exist before me. And so the story actually starts a lot earlier than I initially expected it to. Back in grade school when I was like a kid, and my female best friend and I would like fool around. And we would, play the traditional roles like the boyfriend and the girlfriend or the husband and the wife, but we'd like make out and roll around on our bed. And it was something just like normal between us, and we grew out of it, but we never talked about it. And I remember the one thing about it was like not getting caught and not talking about it. And that was very much a thing. And so as I've gotten older, I've just been curious, and I'm mostly attracted to men. Like, there's no denying that. I've been living with myself for 27 years. Like, I know that to be true about myself, but there have also been times in my life where I have like undoubtedly been attracted to a woman. And as I've gotten older, I've been like, okay, how do I explore this in a way that's not shameful and not in a way that I like give leverage to that guilt or confusion and just allow myself to feel it. So I met Jessie when I visited Costa Rica. I was on a gap year with like a bunch of other kids, and we were stopping at this Rancho Mastatal. It's a permaculture ranch. And she was an apprentice that was working at the ranch and living there for a few months. And I just noticed her right away. She had this aura about her, and she made me nervous. And she had this snarly brown hair and these freckles all over her face and a nose ring. She had these green-gray eyes that looked like storm clouds. I just was really drawn to her. She was super cool. And when we got settled into the ranch, she was like, hey, who wants to wake up at 5 a.m. to milk goats with me? And I like shot my hand up like this. It was like an out of body experience. I was like, okay, I guess I'm volunteering. And she was like, okay, meet me at the chicken coop at 5 a.m. tomorrow. And so I wake up the next morning at 4:30 and I rinse my face with cold water, like so cold that I'm like, my whole face is numb. And I'm patting down like the bags under my eyes because I'm like trying to look nice. Like I wanted to like not look tired. And so I meet Jessie at the chicken coop, and I'm like just feeling these things that are just not normal to me. And she led the way down this wet, narrow path, and it was very muddy because it had just rained. And she's wearing these proper farm boots, and I'm wearing these $2 Old Navy rubber flip-flops, and they're getting stuck in the mud behind me. And so I have to whip it out of the mud, and it's flicking up on the backs of my like legs. And I'm just praying she doesn't turn around and see like me not doing well in this environment at all. And so we finally get to the goats, and she asks me to hold a bundle of wheatgrass while she, for Jane, one goat, and while she milks Jackie, the other goat. And she used her thumb and forefinger to squeeze, bringing the palm and fingers together. And she did this so effortlessly. And I don't know if you've ever tried to milk goats, but it's hard. And when she finished, she looked up at me. She's like, do you want some? And I was like, do I want some what? She said, milk. And she said, and she motioned me to kneel beside her. And I did. I was like, sure, I'll do whatever you ask me to. And Jackie's teats were like really uncomfortably close to my face. And she asked if I was ready. And I said, yes. And I opened my mouth, and she shot one lengthy squirt of goat milk into my mouth, and it sort of slipped down my throat, and I kind of choked, but tried to play it really cool. And we walked back to the chicken coop, and that's where we parted ways. And I said an awkward goodbye, and I replayed the whole thing in my head for like hours and hours and hours on end. And like eventually I left Jessie, and I left the ranch, and like my heart didn't break because I wasn't in love with Jessie, but I was like in admiration of her, in infatuation of her, or like it was a desire to be seen the way I had seen her. And I think what I love most about being a woman who is confident in her own identity and her own sexuality is that I felt the freedom to feel however I wanted to feel with her, without shame and without guilt and without it being secretly infiltrated by traditions and norms. And with Jessie, I was just being myself. And that's it.
Yay. That was awesome. Thank you, Molly. Molly, I know that you write a lot. Do you write these stories for your publication partners?
Well, when I was living with your sister in Switzerland, that's when I was doing a lot of the reflection of that year. So that was originally written then. And then I did a storytelling event where like that goat scene, like that's fully fleshed out. And I did like a 8-minute story there. So that's fully written. So I sort of like, when I saw this theme, I thought of Jessie and I was like, oh, I should do something around that. So I kind of copy and pasted like a paragraph from the story and like made it fit. But yeah, that story has definitely taken on different forms, which has been really interesting, and it fits into all these different themes, and it usually has to do with like identity or whatever. But actually in the storytelling event, it was more about like falling in love with my partner who I'm with right now, Oliver, and how like falling in love with Oliver was like this way different experience than like attraction to Jessie, and like the different, like the contrast between those. And that was kind of interesting. But yeah, it's like definitely taken on different forms, which has been cool.
It's amazing actually how you can have one experience that then turns itself into all different kinds of stories.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I actually find that the story crafting process in of itself is what helps to illuminate what those stories could and might be.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like the process of writing or prepping for a story hour where you're like, oh, wait, I could do this also for this other thing.
Yeah. Well, the limitation I think is super cool because you can get creative. Like, for instance, the flip-flop thing, like that did happen, but it didn't happen at the goat thing. It happened like when we went swimming at a swimming hole like a week later. But it's like such an interesting moment because it's a feeling that I wanted to like represent in like a short period of time, and I can't explain two different scenes in one. You know what I mean? So it's like interesting how things like it ends up being like this creative fiction because you're just like taking and moving it around.
That's right. And actually, thank you for letting us see that, for that insight, because it is interesting how also stories can be true and creatively embellished in a way to make the point more clear.
Yeah.
And yet it has to be enough true that your keep it real theme doesn't, or keep it real superpower doesn't lose its essence. And so it's like, yeah, there's this other experience that I also had, and it's also real, and I can still explain it from an authentic perspective. I'm going to throw it into this story in order to make it all fit. And that's totally allowed because that's what storytelling is. Okay, so what did Molly do well? What should she hold on to?
Can I go? Sorry. I thought it was like super descriptive. Like her eyes were like storm clouds, or like what you were wearing. And this is kind of what I would do in one of those visualizations. So I'm going to like remember that for the next time I tell a story. But yeah, like all the descriptive words that you were talking about. And then also like your feelings were in there a lot, and you got excited when you talked about certain things, or like when you said she gave you kind of butterfly, or I don't know if you said butterflies, but that kind of feeling, I felt it. And then I liked a lot I laughed a couple times, and the one time I remember laughing was when it was like super gross, where you were talking about the milk coming out. Like I was like, ugh. But it made me react, emotionally. And then I really liked the lesson at the end because it felt like true and it felt like genuine. And you did feel like confident in your sexuality. Like not all of us always do, especially in that like kind of potentially taboo way, that you were like, yeah, it's fine. That's who I am. So that was my feedback.
What else? What else was good?
So I've heard you tell stories a couple times now, Molly, and I feel like now I have this, like as soon as you started talking, I almost felt like you take me on a ride every time, right? And I'm like, okay. And I like buckle up, like I'm ready for like wherever that's gonna go. 'Cause I feel like the descriptive words you use and the emotion that you evoke in it is like captivating in the sense that like you pull people into it. Like I wasn't, there was like somebody picking up trash outside my window and I didn't notice it until your story was over. Right? Like it sort of blurred out everything that was around me. And I think that's something that not just with this story, but with all your stories is something to like, to cherish in like your ability to tell stories. Cause I think that's so awesome. And as someone who has had a lot of goat experience, which is probably not going to be normal in your audience, but,
That's awesome.
yeah. So like, as you were describing it, I was like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what she's talking about. And it was like, oh my God. There was like this thrill of someone describing that like grossly and accurately, because that's what's real, right? So it sort of brought me back to that experience, and I've loved my goat experiences. So that was like a really happy moment for me. And describing how to milk a goat is a particular challenge when you don't have a goat in front of you and are like doing the like a demonstration on. So kudos for describing it, like finding the words for that. Because that's a unique challenge.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally.
Molly, I think one of the strengths I find in this story and in all your stories is the keep it real superpower. And I think that's because you have a courage to share stories where, like, I mean, you shared a story about doing shrooms, and you've shared a story about, you know, being attracted to a woman, and you like you're just kind of like whatever, right? And it makes the story just so compelling. I think in part because you don't have any shame around the topics that you're sharing, and so it allows us to lean into, you know, like a different way, you know, if that's the right word. And I think that that's a really, really, really powerful skill to have. And I do think it is, you know, this courage, vulnerability kind of duality that you navigate very well. And so, you know, kudos to you for that, and keep doing it, because it's what makes your stories really, really effective.
Thank you.
Yeah,
what about, go ahead.
And I say one more thing to add on to that, because I think in like the first couple seconds or 30 seconds of the story, you like just casually threw in, oh yeah, we were just making out on the bed, no big deal. And then I was like, what? Like, not that that's bad, but it just like wasn't expecting it. And then the rest of the story explained, you know, why that's so normal for you. But, you know, I wouldn't necessarily be brave enough to say that, even if it did happen in the past, you know, so that was cool.
What about things for Molly to experiment with, play with, make the story more powerful?
There wasn't much for me. I thought it was a really good story, but the one thing was like, and I don't know if we had enough time, but in the end, like you were like talking about how you weren't in love with her and it was like just an attraction, but like I still kind of wanted to know more. Like I was like, but wait, like this whole story was amazing. Like why wasn't she in love with her? And like why was it like so like casual, you know? And I get that attraction is that way, but I just wanted you to like give a little bit more explanation.
To add to that, Agatha, I think actually, given the context that you gave us about how you pulled this from another story about the difference between your love for Oliver and your sort of infatuation, I think that was like a leftover sentence in some ways.
It was. And it was like definitely, and I like hijacked this together like an hour before this meeting. So I just like copy paste, pull it over. I was like, this is kind of like totally not going to vibe, but it might work if someone's not paying attention. Yeah, no, I think you're right. And like, I want to know more too, like as a third party, like looking in, and it's probably because I haven't even processed it yet. Right. Like probably don't even know really what it was or whatever, but yeah, that's a good point. Trying to wrap up the loose ends there at the end.
Well, and I think that maybe what, you know, if I think about pick one theme, you know, the lesson or the sort of the landing point of your story was something about being grateful to be who you are so that you can explore who you are without any shame. And And I think you can tighten that, right? And I think you can tighten your story to be more pointed to that theme, if that's the theme you want. Because I think there's also a theme around curiosity that you could play with, and a theme around, the question of what is love that you could play with. And I mean, I think so anyway, that's something that you can think about. Another experiment that I had that I thought might be really interesting for you to try is Jessie is actually a gender bending name. And you could try to tell this story and reveal at the end that she's a woman.
Ooh, I like that. I like that.
This is something to like play with, and that would completely change your context up front. Yeah. It would almost be like you jump into the middle of it, and maybe the reveal at the end, is better suited for some themes than others. Mm-hmm. But it's something to experiment with.
Yeah, I really like that idea. It's a great idea.
What else? What else can Molly play with?
So there was, I think it was like from the milk point on, that I lost a little bit the thread of how you felt, like what you were feeling in the moment. And I think part of that was just because what was happening externally was interesting and crazy, right? But up until that point, the thread of how you were feeling was so like clear and intense, that maybe play with like, what does it look like to weave in a little of that in those ending moments?
Yeah. I think that's a good point, because actually something that I would like to do too is like that whole scene, like even though it's gross, it was really intimate, and like that's like like it was so like intimate to be like not knowing how to milk a goat, to be milking a goat in front of Jessie, who's like does it really well and does it like so effortlessly. She's kind of this country girl, and she's like, and I'm just like wearing Old Navy flip-flops. Like I'm so not connected to the environment at all, but I'm trying to be and trying to show up in that space. And I think there's a lot of room to like make that more apparent. And I think even like with Stephanie's advice, like if you start with the story, there's might be more like time to get into those details. And then like kind of like the context of my friend is unnecessary in the beginning. Kind of the more of the context I give is like unnecessary, but that underlying message can be made in like a couple sentences. So I feel like that could be interesting as like a way to just tweak it a bit.
Yeah. And Hillary, to your point, I think what you're kind of leaning into is this engage emotion piece kind of missing from the back half of the story. And it's true. I got the same feeling when you talk about like you never use the word gross, but like that was my experience. I was like, oh. and then what I wanted was like a moment where like, what are you doing with your body to like keep it together? Like I can imagine like if I lived that experience, the first thing that would happen is my eyes would tear, and then I would like try to hold back a gag, and like not gag, but be totally gagging, And then it'd be like, don't blink, because you're gonna tear. And then,
oh my God.
So yeah, those are things to play with.
Thank you. This was fun.
Yeah, thanks.
It's so
much.
fun.
Thank you for the tips.
It's always a highlight of my day.
Visit wolfandheron.com to find out more about our story hours.